the military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 24th of June of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, and first we're going to start with the UVB station, also known as the Buzzer or Radio Doom. The UVB 76 radio station has transmitted 11 messages in the current date. Typically the activity of this radio station precedes certain global events. So this radio station transmitted the next words: амиловкус, растирание, генолис, гидопрах, придирчивый, утюгонит, волокита, and фрицитута. So as of now, it's very difficult to say what exactly the Russians were trying to tell us with these words, but one thing is clear, that something big might happen in coming days or maybe even hours. And due to the situation that the previous massive attack carried out by Russians took place 10 days ago, between the 14th and the 15th of June of 2026. Most likely these messages means that the Russians in coming days are going to launch another massive attack deep inside of the territory of Ukraine using maybe even thousands of drones and dozens, maybe even hundreds of missiles. So once again, 10 days ago, the last time the Russians were attacking the territory of Ukraine, which means that the Russians by the end of the 24th of June of 2026 managed to accumulate several thousands of drones, between 1 and 2,000, and probably several hundreds of missiles. As for pro-Ukrainian monitoring sources, they stated that as of now, the Russian Strategic Aviation Group, which most likely would be responsible for the massive attack, is located on the Ukrainka airbase Amur Oblast, which is located in the most eastern parts of the territory of Russia. So the Russian aircrafts are located here, but the sources are saying that these aircraft are ready to attack. Currently, there are at least 5 armored Tu-95 Ms and 2 armed Tu-160 aircraft at the base. So which means that if Russians and when Russians begin redeploying these aircrafts from the most eastern parts of the territory of Russia in the direction of the western parts of the territory of Russia, especially in the direction of the Engels airfield, this is going to be a signal about the beginning of massive attack. As of now, these aircrafts are located through the eastern parts of the Russian Federation, but these aircrafts are fully loaded, which means that the only thing the Russians need, these aircrafts and these pilots need to receive an order, and they will begin. But as of now, this means that still the Ukrainians have from 12 till 24 hours before the beginning of this massive possible attack. Another important thing, and this situation with this radio station, the Buzzer and Radio Doom, maybe this situation connected with the ultimatum that was issued by the President of Ukraine Zelensky to the Republic of Belarus and to the President of the Republic of Belarus Lukashenko. I would like to remind you that almost a week ago, the President of Ukraine demanded the Belarusians to remove the equipment from the territory along the border with Ukraine. If it doesn't happen, then Zelensky promised to attack the territory of the Republic of Belarus, not the territory itself, but the equipment which is located on the territory. And by the way, this evening, the President of Ukraine Zelensky that the Belarusians turned off this equipment. As of now, it's very difficult to say whether the President of Ukraine Zelensky is bluffing, or maybe he realized that the Russians and the Belarusians have already prepared a retaliatory if anything happens along the border. But at the same time, we start receiving a lot of very interesting updates from the Chernihiv and Sumy directions. For example, today, Ukrainian authorities announced mandatory evacuation from the territories along the border. 2 villages in the northern parts of Chernihiv region were evacuated. 3 more villages were evacuated in the northeastern parts of the Chernihiv Oblast, and 7 more villages were evacuated from the most northeastern parts of the Chernihiv region. And most likely the Ukrainians will send troops and forces in this area with the purpose to be prepared if anything happens along the border between the Republic of Belarus, the Russian Federation in Ukraine, which means that the Ukrainians indeed probably have some plans, that the Russians have some plans, that something might happen in this area. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to happen next, but this announcement about mandatory evacuation is a very interesting one. At the same time, the Russians continue attacking this territory, and as of the previous 24 24 hours, the Russians destroyed at least 4 petroleum stations, gas stations through the territory of Ukraine, and one of these gas stations was destroyed through the most northern parts of the Chernigov region. So one thing is clear, that something is brewing in this area. Now let's move to the Sumy direction. Here we have another strike on the territory of the central part of the settlement. As a result of attack, the Russians managed to deal significant damage to this construction. The sources stated that the Ukrainians were using this building as a temporary deployment point, and as of the Sumy direction, during the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded, both through the most northeastern parts of the Sumy region and from the Sumy region itself. According to information we have, the Russians improved their positions between the villages of Ulanovo and Belaya Bereza, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. Furthermore, this information was provided by reliable pro-Russian sources. And another important thing, that the group of forces north stated today that the clashes also continued. The clashes continues on the territory of the settlement of Bachevsk, which means that the Russians are on the territory of the settlement of Bachevsk and are about to enter the settlement of Ulanovo from the south and from the southeast. As for the Sumy direction itself, during the previous 24 hours, another gas station destruction was recorded through the southeastern parts of the settlement, and this is already the second gas station that we have discussed since the beginning of this video. The first one was destroyed in the northern parts of Chernigov region, the second one on the territory of the city of Sumy, and the Russians managed to improve their position significantly through the second defense layer of the city of Sumy, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 23rd of June of 2026, and this is the end of the 24th of June of 2026. The Russians, according to the group of forces north and according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, managed to improve their position significantly in the area of the settlement of Ivolzhanska and around this village. Furthermore, according to this configuration of the front line, this is not just another settlement captured by Russians, this is something like a breakthrough. The Russians answered this major Sumy forest, this one, the biggest one through the entire territory of Ukraine, and now the Russians would try to expand their foothold in this area, because first of all, big forest means a lot of protection against Ukraine's drones, and this is a very important situation. The Russians will use this forest to concentrate troops to be protected against Ukraine's drones and to get as close as possible to the city of Sumy itself. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, lots of sources who have connections with the city of Sumy, and there is a source who basically lives on the territory of the city of Sumy, reported that the situation in the area of the city is much worse in comparison that we can see right now in front of our screens. This source stated that he is still surprised that why the Ukrainian authorities, why Zelensky still hadn't announced the evacuation of these territories, because according to him, this situation should have already happened. But if this situation still doesn't happen, this means that in coming 10-20 days, the Ukrainians would announce the mandatory evacuation of the city of Sumy itself. And when it happens, this is going to be obviously a very big media victory for the Russians, a very big media loss for Ukrainians. Furthermore, today we received the report that Russians also improved their positions in the area of the villages of Zaspilya and Miropolye, and the Russians continue offensive operation further in the direction of the city of Sumy, and the Russians intensify bombardments of the settlement of Krasnopolye. In this video, we can see how the Russians were attacking the settlement with aviation. The Russians are getting closer and closer to the settlement. According to the group of forces north, currently the clashes are taking place for the village of Mikhailovka, which is already something like the beginning of the settlement of Krasnopolye from the northeast. And furthermore, the Russians reported that the Russians continue advancing along railways in the direction of the settlement itself. The battle for Krasnopolye will start probably within the next months, or even something or even earlier. Now let's talk about the Kharkiv direction. As of the previous 24 hours, nothing special. The Russians stopped bombing the logistics in this area, but at the same time, the Russians intensified the bombardments of the city of Kazachye Loponin and the territory around. The group of forces north continues reporting that the Russians continue offensive operation through the settlement of Kazachye Loponin. There are very heavy clashes for the village, and that the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions once again, and the Russians continue moving further in the southern direction. As for the equipment's direction, during the previous 24 hours, nothing special was recorded. Now let's talk about the Slavin's direction. Here we have the biggest number of updates, as you can see. First and the most important thing, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions along the river of Seversky Donetsk and to force the Russians to fall back from the Ukraine side of the river. So, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. This is the end of the 23rd and this is already the end of the 24th of June of 2026. I would like to remind you that somewhere through May, the Russians managed to cross the river and to take under complete control some parts of the settlements of Tetianovka and Prisha, but now pro-Russian sources reported that the Russians were forced to fall back, probably under the pressure and probably due to problems with logistics. But at the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation for the city of Liman, and now we can say that the Russians not just continue the battle, but the Russians are finalizing the battle for the settlement. In coming days, we believe that the Russians will announce complete control over the territory, and then the Russians will continue moving further in the direction of the Seversky Donetsk River. To the east of the city of Slaviansk, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded, and these are the changes. The most important thing is that today several pro-Russian, very reliable sources, according to these sources, they have connections with the situation on the ground, reported that Russians managed to establish complete control over, or the Russians control up to 70% of these big forests on the way towards the settlement of Nikolaevka. Furthermore, the Russians entered these big forests, and the Russians are just several kilometers from the settlement of Nikolaevka itself, and probably the Russians are just 3 kilometers before the settlement, and the battle for the East territory has also been started. Here we have lots of videos published by Russians. In this video we can see how Russians were using dozens of bombs to attack the settlement of Nikolaevka, to attack the Nikolaevka, the Slaviansk power station. The Russians are doing this to soften defenses of the armed forces of Ukraine and to remove any resistance from the Ukrainian side, because when the Russians approach the city, the Russians want to finish the battle for this territory as soon as possible and as fast as possible, with the purpose to enter the most eastern parts of the city of Slaviansk and to begin the battle for the city of Slaviansk and the Slaviansk-Konstantinovka agglomeration from the northeast. Furthermore, the Russians intensify bombardments of the settlement of Kramatorsk. At least we have lots of videos that were published by pro-Russian sources, how the Russians were attacking the northeastern parts of the settlement. Lots of explosions. The Russians are trying to soften defenses of the armed forces in this area as well. Another important thing, the Russians are trying to attack positions that the Ukrainians use to move forces further, reinforcements further in the eastern direction, with the purpose to stabilize the situation along the line of Malinovka and Tikhonovka, where the Russians right now are advancing and trying to finish the battle for these villages. As of the city of Konstantinovka, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything about the situation in this area. The only thing we have is that the Russians right now are focused to take under complete control this pocket. We have a video from this area, and here we have how Russians were bombing and attacking strongholds in this area. Probably this video is archived, not like very archived like a month or so. Probably this is how the Russians began offensive operation in this area, and probably this is how the Russians were bombing these strongholds somewhere at the beginning of this week or at the end of the previous one. So once again, now the Russians are trying to take under complete control the dense network of fortifications to shorten the lines, to cut this pocket, and then the Russians would continue offensive operation further in the direction of the settlement of Alexeyevo-Druzhkovka. As for the settlement of Dobropolia, here we have that the Russians also intensified their offensive operation. During the previous 24 hours, more videos were published how Russians were bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine through the territory, trying to soften Ukraine's defense as well. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours, we start receiving more. During the previous days, we start receiving more and more videos from the church of the siege of Zaporozhye. We have lots of explosions. We have at least two gas stations destroyed by Russians in this area. The Russians are trying to not just to soften logistics of the armed forces of Ukraine in this area, but also to cut the logistics completely. During the previous 24 hours, we received additional videos of how the Russians were attacking parking sites in this area with significant number of trucks that probably the Ukrainians were using to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia with drones. Furthermore, several more gas stations were damaged, and the most important thing today, we received fresh satellite pictures about the situation around the Zaporozhye bridges. If you remember, several days ago, probably on the 22nd of or through the 21st of June of 2026, the Russians, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, had attacked the Zaporozhye bridges, trying to damage them or to damage the constructions of the bridges with the purpose to cut the logistics. As of the end of the 24th of June of 2026, we received first pictures and first fresh satellite pictures that can show us the results of the Russian attack. And according to these pictures, the Russians didn't try to attack the bridges over the river itself. The Russians were trying to attack facilities on the surface, so outside of the territory of river. So the Russians were trying to attack and to destroy bases of the bridges. So the Russians attacked these, let's say, the beginning of the bridge and this part where the bridge ends, which means that the Russians are trying to deal damage not just to bridges but to constructions around and so on. But as of this picture, we believe that that was a test, that was something like a drills carried out by Russians, and the main purpose of those drills were to see what exactly the Russians are able to do to the bridges like the Zaporozhye bridge. But another important thing, that most likely the Russians will continue this process, and maybe during the next massive attack the Russians once again will make an attempt to attack the bridge. The Ukrainians continue attacking deep inside of the territory of Russia. During the previous 24 hours, according to different sources, the Ukrainians attacked objects of energy infrastructure through the territory of Crimea, and in this video we can see several substations that were damaged by the Ukrainians during the day and during the night, and as a result of attack, power outages occurred on the territory of Crimea. Furthermore, we continue receiving fresh satellite pictures where we can see the situation with logistics infrastructure through the territory of Crimea. And according to all these pictures, the Russians first of all continue building more and more pontoon bridges in this area, but at the same time we see that the Ukrainians continue attacking everything that the Russians are trying to construct. So from the first side, of course, we see that Ukrainians are trying to cut the logistics of northern Crimea, but from the other side we see that the Ukrainians are forced to invest lots of resources with the purpose to destroy all these bridges, to control the logistics and so on, which forced the Ukrainians to take their resources from Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk regions. This situation forced the Ukrainians to attack less deep inside of the territory of Russia, and so this is the most important thing that probably the Russians managed to achieve. And the Russians managed to force the Ukrainians to concentrate all their efforts on the territory of Crimea, while the Russians have possibilities to carry out some operations through the entire line of combat contact, and especially through the northern directions like Chernihiv and Sumy. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to happen next, because during the upcoming nights we are waiting for more massive strikes both from the Russian and from Ukrainian side, and maybe, who knows, during the upcoming night between the 24th and the 25th of June, the Russians will carry out their massive attack through the entire territory of Ukraine. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds